One of the major motivations of biotechnology has been the desire to learn how to help the subfertile to have children. Due to the advancements that have been made in the technology of assisted reproduction, ART, many couples have been able to have a family because it is widely accepted that in itself, assisted reproductive technology is morally permissible. Many of the problems it raises face governments rather than individuals. So in general, once a technology is widely regarded as morally acceptable, the moral focus shifts from the technology itself to the question of how can it be put to use and funded in such a way as to promote welfare, to be fair to everyone, and respect everyone's rights. If assisted reproductive technology were cheap, there wouldn't be a problem. Anyone needing it could fund their own treatment, and the infertile could form families on very much the same sort of basis as the fertile always have, as and when they want to and feel they can afford it. But assisted reproductive technology is very costly. If it had to be paid for by individuals, only the rich or those prepared to cripple themselves financially in the prospect of having and raising children would be able to afford it. Inevitably, state funding is going to be needed. However, given that the public purse is not bottomless, this means hard decisions must be made. The moral problems that arise in relation to assisted reproductive technologies have to do with the protection of people's rights versus the promotion of others' welfare. Let's consider first the issue of reproductive freedom. The interaction of practical, financial, administrative, and moral decision-making, together with the fact that there will rarely be a consensus on difficult issues, imply that in liberal democracies, most of the time, the notion of reproductive freedom is taken to mean that the state has a negative duty to secure that everyone should be free to have a child if they want to. However, this does not cancel another difficult question. Are there any people who should be prevented from having children? The standard argument is that some categories of people shouldn't have the moral or the legal right to have a child because they couldn't secure a decent childhood for them. If the rights of a child can trump the rights of a potential parent in this way, or if there isn't a general right to a child, then the government can have a general duty not to prevent people from founding families. On the contrary, it seems to follow that governments might have a duty actively to prevent certain people from having children. This suggestion, nevertheless, runs into two problems. One, who decides which adults should be prevented from creating a family? And how is the government to prevent fertile people from having children or rich people from getting fertility treatment? Deciding who should prevent whom from having children is a difficult social and moral issue. It is a difficult problem in a liberal democracy because liberal democracies are built on the idea of fairly representing all its citizens, and because an overall consensus on who couldn't or wouldn't give a child a decent childhood is highly unlikely. Moreover, governments cannot and should not make judgments about individual cases. They would have to pass laws preventing certain categories of people from having children. On the one hand, might say, it would be easy for the government to prevent certain types of people having a child if these people were both infertile and poor. They would simply refuse to fund fertility treatment. On the other hand, this wouldn't prevent wealthy infertile people using assisted reproduction technologies to have children. Even if the government were to ban everyone from having fertility treatment, wealthy people could simply travel abroad for treatment. Let's consider an analogical argument to see what is the source of the problem. Governments can prevent some people from adopting a child on the grounds that they will not care properly for that child. By analogy, a government should be able to prevent certain people from having a child through assisted reproductive technology if they cannot guarantee that they can take proper care of that child. There is an important analogy between adopting a child and having a child naturally or by means of assisted reproductive technology. A child up for adoption already exists and has rights in its own person. The rights of this child to a decent childhood have already been compromised. It wouldn't be up for adoption unless it had undergone some trauma leading to separation from its parents. To allow such a child to be adopted by an adult incapable of giving it a decent childhood would constitute a further violation of its rights. Now, some might argue that in the case of someone who isn't yet pregnant, there is no child whose rights must be taken into account. The only rights in this case are the rights of the adult. There can be no weighing of the rights of a child against the rights of an adult because there is no child whose rights can be put in the balance. So, the fact that governments are morally required to prevent certain people from adopting does not directly imply that they are morally required to prevent certain people from having their own child. There are a host of reasons why democratic governments are likely not only to recognize the right to have children, but also to interpret this in terms of an entirely general duty not to prevent any adult from at least trying to have children, however unsuitable that adult will be as a parent. Let's consider next the problem of the resources of reproduction, or better yet, the moral and social issues that considering the resources of reproduction creates. A major cause of infertility, and thus for appealing to assisted reproduction technology, is the inability to produce fertile gametes. Since women have been having babies later, this type of fertility has increased. Then many men have low sperm counts or even no sperm at all, and sperm counts quite generally seems to be decreasing. Sometimes the problems are not with the gametes, but with difficulty in providing a womb hospitable to developing a fetus. For many subfertile people, therefore, their chance of a child still depends on their ability to secure fertile gametes and/or a hospitable womb. Securing these resources is not easy. Consider the first issue of gamete donation. Reproductive technology has introduced a demand for donated sperm and eggs. But unlike with the case of sperm donation, donating eggs is not easy. A woman must take drugs to stimulate egg production and undergo invasive procedures so the eggs can be harvested. Moreover, there have never been enough eggs donated to meet demand, especially as in recent years that demand comes not just from infertile women, but also from researchers who study human reproduction and need a ready supply of eggs and sperm and early embryos. The shortage of available gametes has been exacerbated recently in many countries by the passing of two laws. Namely, a law requiring the details of gamete donors to be registered and made available on request to the children of any resulting pregnancy from the date of their 18th birthday, and a law forbidding payment of anything but expenses to gamete donors. The dilemma facing the countries passing the two laws is that of trying to secure sufficient gamete donations to meet demand. The shortage of gametes could be alleviated by allowing people to pay for them. But it has been argued that this is morally unacceptable because it is a commodification of the human body. Let's consider our first objection to this idea. Many countries have banned payment for gametes because they believe that permitting payment is commodifying something that shouldn't be commodified, in this case the gift of life. Note that such a view is consistent with paying donors out-of-pocket expenses, even perhaps with covering loss of income, but it is not consistent with a full-blown market for gametes or wombs. Another objection to permitting payment for gametes is that it condones the exploitation of the poor by the rich. The only reason that people would sell their gametes is this claim is their need of money. The only people who could afford to pay for gametes are the rich. Is there any way we could increase supply of gametes to meet demand without needing either to pay and/or guarantee anonymity? Some things that we could try without repealing the laws against anonymity and paying for gametes is use family as donors, or approach donors on a different basis, encourage egg sharing, use eggs from aborted fetuses, and use artificial gametes. Each of these methods, though, triggers its own moral and social issues. Consider another problem with the resources of reproduction. A series of conditions, such as the MRKH syndrome, endometriosis, hysterectomy, these are all conditions that prevent women from bearing children for themselves. Among other people, such women would need to make a surrogacy arrangement if they want to have a child. There are a couple of moral and social issues that arise from considering surrogacy, namely the fear that the wombs would be regarded as a commodity, the danger of the rich again exploiting the poor women. Also, there's the fact that being a surrogate mother is often not easy. Pregnancy can be a life-threatening condition. The procedures one must undergo to become a surrogate are intrusive and painful. In addition, surrogate mothers might find it hard in certain cases to hand over the baby. And finally, there is the suspicion that not all women or couples who use surrogates do so for medical reasons. Some women might pay others to have their babies for the sake of their careers or their figures. Another type of reproductive resource that must be considered, especially with an eye towards the future, is that of artificial wombs. There are two ways in which scientists have tried to produce artificial wombs. You can take cells from the lining of a woman's womb and grow them in the lab on scaffolds of biodegradable material molded in the shape of the interior of a uterus. And as the cells become tissue, the scaffold disintegrates, and then you can add nutrients and estrogen to the tissue. The first method is ideal for starting a pregnancy off and getting it to settle in the lab before the whole apparatus is put into the body of the mother or a surrogate to bring the baby to term. Another type of artificial womb is represented by tanks of amniotic fluid that stabilize at body temperature. In such tanks, fetuses can be put and connected to machines that pump in nutrients and dispose of waste. So this second method is useful to carry a pregnancy to term. A fetus in trouble in the womb can be removed and brought to term in the amniotic tank. Governments can interpret the right to fund a family as conferring a negative or a positive duty, or even both. Unless the government interprets this as giving an entirely general negative duty, they will have to decide who should be prevented from having children and actively take steps to prevent such people having children. If governments do pass laws preventing certain types of people from having children, such laws are unlikely to command universal assent and will very likely lead to injustices. If government interpret this as conferring a positive right, hard financial decisions will have to be made, unless the whole GDP is to be spent on fertility treatment. So in allocating resources for fertility treatment, one should consider whether it might be morally acceptable for a government to prevent certain people from having children by refusing to fund fertility treatment, by omission rather than by commission. Also, one important problem that we have looked at in this lecture is that there is a severe shortage of resources. Possible causes of this shortage include the existence of laws requiring identification of donors and forbidding payment, and moral concerns about other means of alleviating the shortage of resources, including using eggs from aborted fetuses and artificial gametes or wombs. The possibility of inducing a market in gametes raises the fear that this will bring about the commodification of the gift of life. Surrogacy raises a number of social and moral problems, such as the possible exploitation of the poor by the rich. And finally, the promised availability of artificial wombs might remove the need for abortion and provide a steady stream of embryos for adoption.